Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again today. We're going to be doing another strategy analysis today. We're going to look at Raga, the Dual Kingdom, which was requested. I think I'm probably going to end up working my way through all the Late Age nations first, and then kind of work my way backwards. It'll be interesting because the Late Age is probably the age I have the least experience with. So it's interesting to me to go through all these nations and kind of figure out what they're about and how they work. Before that, I do want to... There's one other unrelated thing I kind of want to talk about. Obviously, my channel was demonetized by YouTube a couple months back when they changed their policies. At the time, I was below 1,000 subscribers, and so I didn't meet the new qualifications, which I think are a little bit bullshit, but it is what it is. I was never making a whole lot of money off of YouTube. It's not my main support by any means. It's not really a support at all. But it was nice to have a little bit of income that I could then put towards computer stuff and games and hardware and such that I would then use to basically make my YouTube better, because I do really, really enjoy doing it, but I am a little limited by what I have. That said, in the time that I have been demonetized, I've decided that honestly I like not having ads on the videos. I feel like ads kind of take people out of it. I feel like ads are a little bit intrusive. And nobody really likes them. So I would like to keep ads off, and I've decided that I don't want to remonetize my channel on YouTube. Instead, I have opened a Patreon, which obviously a lot of people are doing, and I don't want this to come across like I'm begging for money. I'm not. I'm fine. I don't need money, and I don't expect anybody to donate any money. But if you really like what I'm doing, you can visit the Patreon page and donate $1 a month. I don't need much. I don't want much, particularly. But if you'd like, you can toss $1 a month my way, and I will plow that money back into the channel, into upgrading my hardware, getting new recording software, and getting better at what I do here on YouTube. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I'll probably mention it a few times at the ends of videos now and then. There'll be a link in the description. Other than that, it's not going to come up again. Because, like I said, I'm not interested in making money-making a focus. I'm much more focused on just having fun. I mean, this is my hobby. If I make a little bit of money out of it, okay, that's cool. If I don't, no worries. So, moving back to what we're all actually here for, Raga, the Dual Kingdom. Raga has an interesting little backstory blurb. Most of the Late Age nations do. There's a lot more interaction between the different nations in the Late Age and in the period leading from the Middle Age to the Late Age. In the Early Age, most nations are fairly independent, with the exception of a few interactions between, like, Machaca, Hinnom, and Baratos, for example, that kind of thing. But in the Late Age, almost all of the backstories of the Late Age nations have interaction with some of the other Middle Age nations back in the day. So Raga is fascinating because it's actually, in a way, two nations put together. The difficulty is, and I think the weakness in its design, is that one of those nations is clearly and strictly superior to the other. So, there's basically two categories of units and commanders in Raga. There's Kalins, flying area, you know, just like Kalim of the Early Age or the Middle Age. They're size 3, flying, relatively fragile, hard-hitting units. And then there are Turans, who are Abyssian descended, and the Taurans are a little bit tougher, fire-resistant, have a couple of survivals, and the Taurans form the bulk of the really, really useful military units. This is what I mean when I say that one side is just objectively better than the other, and we'll talk about that as we go along. So, commander-wise, you have an area scout who is flying. You have a Paigan Salar, who is a basic infantry commander. You have an area Spabed, who is a basic flying commander, who has ice protection, as most of the area units do. Most of the area units are cold resistant and have ice protection. The Tauran units are fire resistant and have wasteland and mountain survival. So you've got basic commanders all the way up through here, up to the Tauran Shah and the area Shahs. The area commanders have less leadership than the Tauran commanders, and don't give a morale bonus or anything. You can see the Tauran Shah is 80, while the area Shah is only 60 and doesn't have a morale bonus. That may be by way of trying to compensate for their flight, but it's an interesting little distinction. Then you get into the mages. You have the Karapans, which are basic Tauran mages. They're fire and holy, and they have randoms in air, death, and blood. So actually quite useful mages. For the price, they're reasonably efficient researchers. They're sacred, so they cost very little upkeep. And you can random the blood-death crosspath, which is quite useful. I'm sorry, the fire-death crosspath, or the fire-blood crosspath, which can, with boosters, be used to summon devils. Which are not the best blood summon, but they're pretty good. The equivalent area mage is the Athravan, also holy and fire, but randoms in air, water, or astral instead. So you can use these guys to set up communions, theoretically. The Zautars are the second level area mage, twice as expensive, still sacred, level 2 priests, and they are all elemental, but with a potential astral random. So these guys, quite solid. The astral random ones you could potentially use to lead communions, albeit expensive communions. Also, you can get air 2 or water 2 or fire 2 out of them, all of which are useful in different ways. In particular, if you get water 2, then Zautars are very good at casting acid spells. The level 2 Raga mage is pretty much identical. This one's old. Yeah, they're both old. The Dastur, but has randoms in fire, air, death, and blood. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Dastur is just a better mage. For one thing, blood access and death access, in the late game, those are much more important than elemental magic in a lot of contexts. Like, it's easy to come up with a late game plan if you have a lot of access to death and blood. It's harder to come up with an effective late game plan if all you have is access to elemental magic. Elemental magic really kind of spikes in the mid game and then drops off, whereas blood and death have power spikes in the mid game, but then also continue to become more powerful in the late game, because they have access to immortal summons and very powerful battlefield clearing spells, and battlefield affecting spells. Also, blood can, unlike the others, scale almost infinitely, because blood magic is limited primarily by your number of blood slaves, your blood slave income, and you can push your blood slave income up very, 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 very high in a way that you just can't do with other gems. The Area Seraph is the highest level area mage. Actually, almost the same price as the Zautar, just slow to recruit. That's about the only difference. And starts with 3 air natively. Can't random any more air, but can get fire, water, or astral. Not being able to random 4 air is a shame, but 3 air is still a very potent and effective mage. 3 air can cast Storm in battle. 3 air can cast Thunderstrike without any boosters. It's useful. Having the astral is also useful. So the Kalem side is basically mostly air and some water magic, a little bit of fire, but not a huge amount of fire, backed up with communion potential. The Turan Sorcerer has 3 fire, 1 death, 1 blood, and an air, death, or blood random. No fire random. The Turan Sorcerer is probably the single most useful mage the nation has. Blood and fire crosspaths, of course, allow for devils. Blood and death crosspaths allow for vampires, eventually. And also bone fiends, although bone fiends are not a very important summon. Air and blood crosspath allows for storm demons. And the potential to have 2 death or 2 blood is very high with Turan Sorcerers, which are very, very useful paths and levels of those paths to have. The 3 fire is higher than you really need, but it's still valuable. It's still useful to have fire, especially because with 3 fire you can cast some of the fire battlefield enchants and you can spam fire elementals if you need to. They also do have a heat aura, which actually is a negative for a blood mage, because it does mean that occasionally, just every now and then, these guys will spontaneously light their own blood slaves on fire in combat, which is morbidly hilarious, but unproductive. If your blood slaves burn to death, you can't use them. That's one of the main differences between blood slaves and other gem types. Other gem types are just in your inventory. Blood slaves are, of course, units on the battlefield, and they're pretty pathetic units, so they can go down really, really easy. So, looking at the units real quick then, you have Pygons, which are basic Turan militia. They're not very strong, but they're very cheap. You have area archers, which are flying composite bow archers. In the late age, these guys are not terribly useful. I mean, composite bows are nice and all, but they're not crossbows, and most people in the late age wear heavy armor. Area light infantry, which have cold protection and an ice lance. Area infantry, which have cold protection and an ice blade. Wasn't that what I just clicked on? Yes. Turan infantry, who have a broadsword and a javelin and reasonable protection and defense scores, but a high resource cost. Turan heavy infantry, which have much higher 3 points more protection for only 3 points more resources. I would usually, if I was recruiting Turan infantry, be recruiting Turan heavy infantry for that reason. It's not much more expensive for the additional ability. Then you have the Ice-clad Zeadins. And the Ice-clad Zeadins are basically just heavily armored, resource-expensive area infantry. They have ice lances, which are magical and get a charge bonus. They have 2 points of ice protection, so in a cold 3 province, Ice-clad Zeadins are super, super well protected. Like, protection of 23, I think? Very, very well protected. And, of course, they're sacred. So there's that. They do have that going for them. That said, their stats overall are not terribly impressive. Hit points low, strength low, attack skill mediocre, defense skill okay, but not anything to write home about. Combat speed actually quite slow, because they have flying. And, of course, they have high encumbrance. On the Turan side, so those are mostly, these 4 are your area units. These guys are Turans that you can recruit. 1 second, we'll get to that. Turan horse archers are actually quite cheap, except in recruitment points. They have a spear and a composite bow. Once again, like I said, composite bows, not the very most useful, but still, having horse archers can be handy. Turan cavalry have a lance attack and a hoof attack, so they get 2 attacks, as well as a composite bow, and protection 15. So these are a solid medium cavalry unit. Savarin cataphracts have a lance charge, a broadsword, and a hoof. Yeah, so more attacks than the Turan cavalry. And the composite bow, very high resource cost, but of course in the late age, high resource cost is easier to maintain. And 16 protection, so Savarin cataphracts are a very solid unit, just expensive and slow to recruit. And the Savarin guard are an upgraded version of them, with bodyguard, slightly higher stats, and 20 total protection. Savarin guard are a fantastic cavalry. They also have war elephants, and their war elephants have 3 attacks. They have 2 long spears, which helps. That said, they suffer from the limitations of war elephants everywhere. They do have high protection, which helps a lot, but low morale, and trample means that if you try to use these guys against other players, they will usually end up routing back through your own army and destroying it. For expansion, Turan war elephants are fine. Or they would be if their competition wasn't the Zeadins. Zeadins are super expensive in gold, but not honestly too unreasonable in resources. I mean, compare, the Ice-clad Zeadins are 40 resources each. The Zeadins are only 60 resources each, 46 recruitment points, so no more recruitment points than a regular cavalry unit. They're flying. They have 4 attacks total, 3 of which are melee attacks that are ongoing, and 1 of which is a lance charge that does a crazy amount of damage. I believe it's actually a 30 damage roll for the lance, depending on how far you've moved, and since you're flying, I think you always get that full bonus. 20 protection, high attack and defense skill, good strength. Oh, they only have 15 hit points. Oh, but wait, when these guys die, they just turn into a griffin. The only one that dies is the rider, and the griffin has, I believe, the same protection, higher morale, the same or higher magic resistance, and it still has 2 attacks. It still has the claw and bite attacks. So, killing a Zeadin does not actually improve your situation vis-a-vis the number of Zeadins on the field. Now, once the Zeadin is dead, the griffin has to go back to the capital in order to get another Zeadin, but it's still a griffin, and I believe they're still sacred. So, you don't hardly have to bother going back. Actually, they might not be sacred. But in any case, killing the Zeadin does not really decrease the killing power all that much. And killing the Zeadin is hard. 15 defense skill and 20 protection, and 14 morale base. Very, very solid stats. And then, of course, these units are sacred. So they cost half the upkeep they should, and they're blessable. Now, this is why I say that Raga's design is a little poorly done. Because, you see, these units can only be recruited in hot provinces, and these units can only be recruited in cold provinces. The area, and the same with the mages, the area mages can only be recruited in the cold. The Turan units can only be recruited in the heat. Well, but normally you want to go heat 3 or cold 3 anyway, and especially on a nation like this where everybody has either heat or cold resistance. There's no reason, absolutely no reason, not to go either heat 3 or cold 3. But because Zeadins exist, you want to go heat 3 for Zeadins, to have Zeadins all the time. And that means you never see these units. These units are simply not recruited, because Zeadins are extremely powerful sacreds, easily competitive with Anakites, if not slightly better. And they require heat. So you go as Raga, you basically just turn heat to 3 automatically when you're creating your pretender and never think about it again. So as a result, it looks like Raga is like a mixed, air astral / blood death fire nation. No, they're a blood death fire nation. That's what they have, that's what they do, because they are always heat 3, they are always recruiting Zeadins. There is no reason. Comparing the ice-clad Zeadins to the actual real Zeadins is just, it makes you sad. The ice-clad Zeadins are nowhere near competitive, and certainly in terms of resources, they cost far too much for what they bring to the table. You take Zeadins, give them a quickness bless, and turn them loose, and they will destroy everything. There's there are ways to stop them. I mean, I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect a little bit. There are ways to stop them. But stopping Zeadins typically requires focused research and a significant commitment of mages and gems. There are no troops in the late age that can stop Zeadins. Possibly, like, full meme-blessed Mictlan with Jaguar Warriors could do some damage. But honestly, even then, the sheer toughness of Zeadins and the griffins that they turn into when they die would make it very difficult. I mean, Zeadins turn into an objectively better unit when they're killed. Griffins have a lot more hit points, they have higher strength. Their attack and defense skills, I think, are basically the same, very similar. Their protection drops maybe by 1 point, if I'm remembering correctly, and their morale actually goes up. So, like, killing a Zeadin only makes life worse for you. That being so, Raga's magic is entirely wrapped up in these 3 wizards right here. You have the Karapan, 1/3 of whom are reasonably efficient blood hunters. You have the Daster, all of whom are fairly efficient summoners, and most of whom are good battle mages as well. Actually, all of them are effective battle mages with the right research. And you have the Turin sorcerers, all of whom are big fire mages, and most of whom will also have Death 2 or Blood 2. Some of them will even have Water or Astral. So you can form Sabbaths, with the Blood version of Communions with your mages. You can cast big fire spells, you can cast big death spells. Occasionally, if you get the right randoms on a sorcerer, you can also cast big air or water spells, but I wouldn't count on that. Mainly it's fire, death, and blood. But death and blood, having reliable, widespread death and blood access is frankly enough to carry a nation. And that is what Raga relies on. So Raga's early game is Zeadins all the time, all day, every day. And then as they expand, they start to shift into a blood nation, where they research construction and some basic, well, I was thinking construction in order to get sanguine dowsing rods and go straight into blood, but you don't want to do that too early. You want to focus on your fire and death early, so probably you research enchantment early on, and evocation, and you use that to back up the Zeadins, until eventually you're able to transition to a full-scale blood economy and be pumping out demons like they're going out of style. At which point you have entirely flying armies of devils and Zeadins backed up by storm demons and more Zeadins, with sorcerers behind them casting blood magic and death magic. You have Skelespam online, you have all kinds of tools, and you never have to touch these guys. Now, if you build a fort in a province that doesn't have your dominion, you might be able to recruit some Kalian mages now and then, but they're all sacred, so you have to build temples there, which means you're going to be spreading your Heat 3 dominion there. Well, area seraphs actually don't require temples. They're not sacred, and neither are Turin sorcerers. So you don't necessarily have to build temples. You could build a fort and a lab and recruit a few area seraphs and go site searching or something with them to get air and water and astral gems, and you could put something together. But the primary strength of Raga is the way the nation is designed is just always going to be blood, death, and fire magic backing up Zeadins, because Zeadins are almost enough to carry a nation by themselves. Site-wise, you've got Lake Urmia, which gives you air, water, and astral pearls, and you have the Mountain of the Ever-Burning Caverns, which gives you fire. You don't get death gems natively, so you do have to search for those. And of course, your temples are very, very expensive as Raga, so spreading your scales is a little bit trickier than it would otherwise be. However, your temples generate fire gems, so your fire gem income will rapidly outpace everything else if you're building temples with any concentrated kind of force. When you're putting together a pretender for Raga, Raga is probably the, interestingly, Raga gets the Indian pretenders. I'm not quite sure why, but they get the Indian pretenders. They also get a lot of the, like, Sumerian or Middle Eastern pretenders, and then the African, Machaka pretenders, the Lord of the Summer Plague and the Desert Sun. They get the Golden Idol, which is a very good Bless chassis, so if you're going meme Bless with the Zeadins, you could do worse than taking a Golden Idol. They get a whole lot. They get these Ahuras, which are more of the Indian chassis. They also get the Azi, which is a fairly unusual expanding dragon-type chassis. Shape changes into a Great Warlock, and he's basically... I mean, he's basically a Drakon, but he flies and breathes fire. And also he's cheaper than a Drakon, or a regular dragon. So, like, if you compare the Azi to the Fire Dragon, the Azi is actually strictly superior. Now, the downside is he doesn't start with any paths. He starts with 1 point in... No, he starts with 1 point in death and 1 point in fire, so never mind. He starts with a lower path. But, if you're looking for an expanding monster, always take the Azi. The Azi is, as I said, objectively superior to the dragon. Has all the same qualities as a dragon, except he also starts with death magic. And is unsurroundable and has 2 extra attacks. So I can't see why you would ever want to pay 20 points more to get a worse monster. All this said, Raga doesn't need an expanding monster because Zeadins are enough to expand by themselves. So you can just go full meme Bless with an immobile. You can take an expanding monster if you want your expansion to be absurd as opposed to merely fast. Or you can take a rainbow chassis and just kind of wait. You have great warlocks who start with blood magic and are adept crossbreeders, so they're a lot like freak lords in that way. They're a little bit worse at being crossbreeders, but they have heat and they're fire resistant. I don't know. I think I would rather take a freak lord. I mean, a freak lord does the same thing, costs 20 more points, but 10 points less per path. So if you're going with a rainbow, the freak lord is actually going to end up being cheaper. He's not fire resistant, which I suppose is a weakness, but not a big one. And he does have fear, if that ever matters. Yeah, but honestly, as Raga is definitely one of the nations where you can take an imprisoned god if you want to. If you want to play imprisoned, you can take an imprisoned golden idol or something and stack up a whole bunch of non-incarnate buffs, or even, you know, you take an imprisoned freak lord, stack up rainbow buffs across the board, or something silly like that. And if you do that, you don't need Dominion that's too high. You know, you could have 3 across the board and still have room for almost 5 scales. You go down to 5, now you have room for 5 scales and quite a few points left over. Yeah, not sure how you work it. Probably what you do is you kick something up to 4 and go with plus 4 scales. You know, take heat 3, obviously. Growth 3. Your research isn't the greatest. It's okay, but not fantastic, so you probably want some magic. You will definitely want income and production for your Zeadins. So I would definitely take a couple points of productivity. Hopefully productivity 3. Maybe go misfortune 1, productivity 3. These scales are perfectly functional. And now you can add all sorts of ridiculous minor buffs. You know, shock resistance, defense skill. Let's take some reinvigoration, maybe. Maybe we can bump that up to 4 somehow. I'm not really building this pretender, obviously. Magic weapons, just to make sure you can always hit people. And then minor magic resistance to help with that. Or Spirit Sight. Spirit Sight wouldn't be bad. since you have Astral and Death. So okay, yeah, let's take some Spirit Sight. And then in Death, we can take Undying, just to make our Zeadins even harder to kill. Grab a little bit of Nature. Unaging, maybe. That will help your Sacred Mages not be old. And then in Blood, you can take... Oh yeah, Strength of the Flesh. Just make them hit even harder. You could do this if you wanted to. Cut that down, because we're only spending 3 points there. Put it in Earth instead, so that you can get 2 times Reinvigoration. This is a functional Mage Bless and Sacred Bless. Or, you can go, you know, full meme, and have Quickness Zeadins. Like, Quickness, and let's say Fire and Shock Resistance. Well, they already have Fire Resistance, you don't really need that. Let's say Quickness and Hard Skin. Now you have to drop a few scales. So let's do that. And what else? I have 1 point in Blood I'm not really using. Let's kick that up to 4. Take Blood Surge. Drop back down to 5. There we go. There's the meme Zeadins. These guys will absolutely dumpster pretty much anybody they come across. If you don't want Hard Skin, which honestly it's not really necessary and won't stack terribly, terribly well, you can take 2 times Strength of the Earth instead to kick their strength up by 4. So now they're hitting at damage 22. So this is Raga. Raga is a very interesting nation. It has a lot of interesting ideas behind it, but in practice, there is one dimension of the Dual Kingdom that I think is much stronger than any of the others, and that is meme-blessed Sacreds transitioning into late-game Blood. And as a consequence, if you're playing to win as Raga, which most people who take Raga are going to be playing to win, because that's really what Raga does this so well, and it's so well known for it. If you're playing to win as Raga, you are going to be taking heavily blessed Sacreds and Blood Magic. And the other interesting things about the nation very often won't really see the light of day. Occasionally you'll have a Zautar, occasionally you'll have an Area Seraph, but not all that often. So, thanks for watching. I'll keep doing these. Like I said, I'm probably going to end up going through the late ages first. I've already done several of them. We've already looked at Jomon, we've just looked at Raga, we've already looked at Arithia. I'll probably look at some of the other... The late age is interesting. To me, the late age is interesting mainly because of how apocalyptic it is. Like, the late age is blood and death everywhere. You have the ruins of nations that have disintegrated. You have nations that have revived themselves under new rulership. You have nations that are attempting to exact revenge. You have Relay, which is like the Urmor of the late age. They're like the big bads. But you also have Lemuria, which is literally Urmor but ghosts. So it's interesting. You have things like Satis, instead of being a swamp faction, has turned into a desert faction based around Egypt. It's fascinating stuff, and I will eventually go through all of these. I'll probably will jump around. I say I'll go through the late age first, but I'm not going to hold myself to that strictly. I'm going to jump around between late and middle age and all of that, and even into early age. To be honest, early age is probably my favorite if I had to pick one. Middle ages are a lot of fun, but I also do like the early ages. You have a lot of choice. There's a lot of varied abilities and skills here, and there's a lot of interesting stuff to look at. So, thanks you all so much for watching. Do check out the Patreon if you're interested, if you like what I do. I do appreciate your support. And have a good one. I'll see you in the next video.